Good evening and welcome to Art 244 Bronze Casting. I got this very nice piece of sculpture. It's probably a base element from Paula. And so her river otter is going to be swimming or doing some kind of gymnastic kind of a thing, kind of associated with this, but this is going to be the base element from which it springs. So we've got some river rock, and we've got this driftwood element here, and I just have to try to figure out how to cast this thing. And I think what I have to do is first weld this on here better. So I'm going to take some little bits of wax and warm them up in my hands, and I'm going to pull my torch and all of my hot tools over here so that I can do this, and I'm going to gate this thing up as people arrive, because that's what I do. I'm kind of doing an icebreaker demonstration even as people arrive tonight. And I'm finding like my bronze casting class roster so that I can say hi to everybody and I know who's all here and everything. But in my little hands, I'm going to squeeze and warm up this little piece of wax, scrap wax that I've got in my hand. So it's kind of hard to see that this is the art and this is a pile of scrap wax. Don't get them confused. It's easy to get confused, but I don't want you guys to get confused. So I'm going to kind of check this over and see how well this is all welded together. Maybe I'll even start from the back welding this together. Oh my gosh, she even put a fish. There's a salmon down here, right there. There's a salmon. Did you see that? I didn't see that. Right underneath the log is a salmon. So, and it's hugging a rock, and I have to try to figure out how to make sure that that casts and does not miscast. So I'm taking a tiny little piece of the wax that I have warmed up, and I'm rolling it out into a little bit of a, what is it? It's a coil. In ceramics, we call it a coil of clay when we kind of roll out the clay into a coil. So I'm just going to call this little piece of wax the same thing, a coil. And I wanted to try to lay this coil up against the log here, right where it is resting on top of this rock right there. And I'm going to try to break it to the right size so that it just becomes a little bit more connective tissue, unobtrusive and hidden in the sculpture, and yet I'm really going to need to make a better connection between that log and that rock to make sure that they cast together. So I don't know if you can see what I've done there, but I have kneaded that little thing. I've laid it in there and kind of tucked it in there so it's right where the log is meeting the rock. And now I'm going to weld it into place. And this, of course, is the fun part because we get to use fire. The fire is right over here at the top corner of the screen. And I'm going to heat up my knife and then just do a deft little tiny bit of welding to get that piece of wax to melt and to join the log to the rock that it is sitting on without getting in the way of the salmon or anything else. And so I've done it. And you can see that shiny little weld that I made there right between the bottom of the log and the top of the rock that it is sitting on. And I'm going to go around to the other side and see if I can't do exactly the same thing on the other side. And that will just kind of beef up. Oh, it's pretty beefy now that I look at it in cross section. It's a pretty beefy transition between the log and the rock. Okay, and the salmon. Okay, got it. So now I'm just trying to figure out on this thing what orientation in space I want to cast this thing. And I'm kind of thinking that I'm probably going to want to do it about like this so that I can put gates or sprues along the top edge of this and one more sprue into the top edge of this log right here so that they cast nicely. And so I'm going to put a pin in that and remember that and do that in about 5 minutes. People are arriving, and that's good. I'm going to turn this thing over because the backside of this is a mess. This is just a bunch of scrap wax that kind of got stuck together to form the basis of this thing. And so I need to come in here with my hot knife and weld it all together so that it becomes much more unitized. And I got one of my beard hairs in there. I know, too much information, but
That's all right. It goes with all the cat hair that was in the wax. I don't have a cat.
maybe that's a cat hair. I'm not going to say that that's a beard hair. I don't know what the heck that is. But this is really exciting that you brought this in today because you were in town. Thank you very much for bringing it by because it gives me something to work on tonight. This was the only pattern that came in today. So that's fine. No harm, no foul. But I'm using my hot knife to do lots and lots of welding of these pieces and parts together to get me a really nice unified thing that then is going to cast better. Because if it's all welded together in the wax, then the bronze is going to flow so much more effectively between all of these little shapes and things, especially on the back of the bottom of this thing that doesn't matter. What I'm working on right now is the bottom of this thing. Remember, all of the rocks and all of the fish and the driftwood and everything is on the top. And we want to have all of that detail, all of those individual river rocks and everything there. But on the bottom, where all of these little joints and things were not quite completely welded together, I want to weld them together a lot better so that all of the metal will flow very nicely and make this one well integrated sculpture piece. And so I think I'm pretty much able to do all of that. Now that I've got all of this welded together, I'm just going to set it down and let it cool off for a minute. And if I set it on the tabletop, cold table, will act as a heat sink and pull all the heat out of it so that it can freeze back down to room temperature really nicely. Well, I turn to you fine people and greet you and say welcome to Bronze Casting. I'm James Fritz, your lovely host, and we'll just see who's all here today. I got to turn on the participants list, and let's see.
I had a question.
Yeah, what's up?
So when it comes to attaching stuff, like you were saying about welding it, like does a scoring method work good, or do you recommend just welding it all the time?
The scoring method doesn't work good for wax. That only works well for the ceramics, for the clay stuff. So we do need to attach stuff really well. We need a hot knife to be able to weld it. And if it needs welding, I will do it when it gets to me if you can't do it there. But please try to do it if you have a heat source of some kind and can get your knife hot. That would be good. You know, like I was saying in the first weeks of this thing, if you've got an arm that keeps falling off or a leg that keeps breaking off at the exact same joint all the time, it does need to get welded. And I will repair any piece that comes in here that has a weak spot or a piece coming off of it. So thanks for that question, Cameron. That was good. Let's see. Zach is on page 2. Where's Zach?
I'm glad that you did that because I was wondering about that because all the gaps in it, I was wondering how it would pour and pour evenly. I think I probably missed that somewhere along the way that needed to be done.
No, that's okay. Who looks at the bottom of anything? I don't look at the bottom.
That's kind of what I thought. I thought, well, it's going to go on the base and nobody's going to friggin' see it anyways.
Yeah. No, when I become the guy who is gating the pieces up for casting, then I stop looking at it as an art piece and I start looking at it as a casting pattern. And then I have to reevaluate, you know, all of the seams and the joints and everything in terms of whether it's going to be successful for metal flowing through it.
To Tammy as a gift.
Okay, so I got the attendance taken. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Emily. We don't get to talk anymore very much. How's Emily doing tonight? Are you doing okay?
I'm good.
All right. You know, I still owe you a letter of recommendation. Do you have colleges that you are applying to right now?
I applied to the University of Oregon.
Okay, and so do you want me to go ahead and write a letter of recommendation for that?
Yeah, it's gonna be for the scholarships.
Okay. Okay, University of Oregon scholarships. If you could send me a an address or a contact person that I'm supposed to write to, or if you could tell me if there's a website or something that I can go to and find that contact information, then I can address the letter to the person or the program that it's supposed to go to, and it looks more professional that way.
All right.
So I can take it as an email, or if you can just, tell me where you're applying, I can go to that website and do it the same thing.
I'll send it in the email because I don't have it with me at the moment.
Okay. So I'm making a little note of that here. Oh, and you can see that because you can see me writing stuff down. So I'm doing a recommendation letter, and it's for scholarships. So it's probably gonna be some kind of scholarship committee or program or something like that. Okay, got that. And that's gonna go over here where I'm probably gonna either lose it or forget about it. Sorry about that. That's kind of the way things go in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis. We do everything weird here. I gotta go look at the chat and see if something's going on here. Ah, sure, you bet I can do that. Okay. So while this thing is cooling, I'm gonna set it off to the side. I'm gonna take my scrap wax pile, which doesn't that look like a cool abstract sculpture? Maybe I just have to cast that, chunk of glippity glop because it looks cool too. Nah, I'm gonna put that aside. There's a question here about, can I demonstrate the smoothing process with the solvent? And so I'm going to take this sculpture that I made last week that I really haven't smoothed out yet because it's not refined yet. I'm still working on stuff, but I can do this as a demo for you guys today. I have to turn off camera for just a second to go grab my solvent, and I'll be right back, because it's just right over here. And so I'm going to pour a little solvent into a plastic container and bring it back to the workspace where you guys can see me work. I do like to have, I found out working with the solvents that having a big wide bottomed container is really nice, because when you knock over the solvent and spill it all over your workspace, including your computer, that's bad. And so a small bottomed container was not as successful for me as a wider bottom container. So something that is a pint, 16 ounces, whatever, cottage cheese container. And I've only got just a little bit of solvent in the bottom of that, but I'm going to paint the solvent on the surface of this thing and let it sit for a minute, because it's a solvent, so it needs a little time to actually dissolve. And I guess I'm looking around for a paper towel and I don't have one, so I'm gonna go get a paper towel or four out of the dispenser while this is dissolving. I'll be right back.
He must have been a fly on the wall at my house today, because I was doing solvent and using a small little plastic container with a snap-on cap. And I
Yeah.
spilled it, and I was like really glad I had cardboard down.
Okay, so I've got paper towels now. So this is not rocket science. This is kind of like cleanup on aisle 9 science, really. But allowing the solvent to sit on here for 30 seconds or so really does allow it to dissolve the surface of your wax just a little bit. And we are taking off the top, 64th of an inch. We're taking off the top, hundredth of an inch or something of wax, which is where all of the tool marks are. I don't know if you can, this thing doesn't really focus that good, but I've got all the serrated edged tool marks embedded in the wax. And so as I kind of work this, I'm taking out all the tool marks, and this does a really good job of smoothing and blending a surface for me, so that because my thing that I'm dealing with right here in this particular sculpture is flesh flesh and muscle and bone kind of sticking through. I mean, flesh in tension, covering over muscle and bone. I'm interested in, that kind of surface. So there's a polishing that's happening, and I have to keep turning the cloth. I got to get this out of the, light so that you can see this, but all of the brown color on my white paper towel is dissolved wax, and the dissolved wax is also clogging up the pores of the paper towel. The paper towel is like the equivalent of a 400 grit piece of sandpaper, and once all of this dissolved wax clogs up the pores in the towel, then I'm just smearing it around and not doing anything. So I have to keep turning the paper towel to a clean surface, and then I'm getting more and more of the wax coming off of the sculpture and embedding into the paper towel, and that polishes the surface more effectively. Still, you're probably going to find that you're going to need to do this with 2 or 3 applications of solvent and 2 or 3 clean paper towels to really get a polished surface. And the reveal of the surface when you get done is something, when I'm doing a human figure, naturalistic representational human figure, you get the whole sense of flesh and bone and muscle, because this does a really good job of blending complex curves and surfaces. And so the sharply defined things become bone, and things that are very softly defined become flesh and muscle, flesh over muscle. And so for a human figure study where you're interested in the sensuality of the pose, whether it is an athletic pose or whether whatever you're doing, and I'm doing these these contemporary figurative pieces, where I'm really interested in kind of a contemporary look to this thing. I'm not interested in a more historic thing. I'm not interested in what modernism was exploring throughout the 20th century in terms of texture. I'm really interested in a 21st century approach to the human figure, because I'm fairly invested in these things. I really want this to be something that a collector would want, that makes a contribution to the art world. I'm kind of swinging for the fences with these sculptures. I'd really like them to be collected by museums, and someday to have James Fritz be in the art history books as a major player somehow in the arts. And that can still happen for me even as a 60-year-old artist or more, because oftentimes artists don't even hit their stride as an artist. They don't find their voice. They don't really find their style of working until midlife or later. It's very rare that you have the artist who's this flash in the pan, brilliant person as a 20-year-old. Most of us have to refine our craft over a lifetime before it really comes together. So I know that's not what you guys want to hear, but then most of you guys aren't art majors either. But this is the scary part about being an art major, is that you're kind of signing up for a life of poverty and hard work and school of hard knocks and everything else. But we trade that off for the possibility of really being able to commune with art, and live a bohemian lifestyle, and try to actually make something that is outside the box, and suffer for your art, and all of those wonderful cliches that we do in the art world and in art history. All of the stories that we learn about in art history are all the poor starving artists who worked their whole lives in almost obscurity, and of course never sold a piece in their career, like Vincent van Gogh. And then suddenly after they're dead, all of their stuff gets discovered and is marketed, and then everybody loves it. And everybody loves the artist, but of course that doesn't do the artist any good because the artist is dead by then. Am I bitter? No, I'm not bitter. But anyway, I'm going to take this poor piece of very brown paper towel and replace it with this one. And I'm just going to dry this surface really quickly. So I hope that my little thing here for, I don't know, 5 minutes was probably way overkill for your question, but this was a little demonstration about using the solvent as part of the smoothing process for this. And so what a wonderful sculpture. I think this is just so cool. And one of the things I like about this piece is that if I was to make a mold of this so that I can make multiples of this sculpture, I can envision this sculpture not only as a reclining sculpture laying on the tabletop, and I'm going to just change video angles for just a second to talk about that. You know, it can be a reclining piece that lays on the tabletop as a horizontal piece, and you know, everybody gets it. Okay, it's a reclining sculpture, and that's nice. But what about also casting it so that I could maybe put it up on a base element like this and have it be a vertical piece, you know, that would just kind of balance on one knee and be displayed like that? Wouldn't that be cool? So I could do that as a variation on this theme, maybe just changing the hair a little bit so that the hair responded either to gravity or wind just a little bit better than the way that the hair kind of piles down, you know, onto the tabletop in this orientation in space. Then, you know, if that's cool, you know, why not, you know, try other orientations in space and display this on a base so that's standing up, just to see what that might be like. And you could go just about any direction at all with this sculpture. And suddenly I've got 4 variations on the sculpture just by putting it into different orientations in space. So, you know, you can really start thinking very creatively about how these things might work spatially. And actually, I could make a mold of this thing and cast 4 or 5 different versions of it and just orient it in 4 or 5 different ways, and then display them all together as variations on a theme. And you know, that could be really cool. So anyway, that is the kind of stuff that we play with as artists in graduate school and professionally. And that's like 4 or 5 things, 4 or 5 steps away from where you guys are working right now as artists and art students. But you know, that's a thing. So I'm going to take this sculpture and put it back over here off camera and out of my space. And then I'm going to get out my gating wax and actually try to gate up this this base element from Paula. So let me grab the gating wax, which is just off camera over here, and bring it into my workspace, my luscious workspace, and see what I can do here. Bring the flamethrower back in here, because now I have taken the flammable liquid out of here. So now I can work with the flamethrower in here and see how I'm going to do this. Change camera angles. I'm also open to, you guys can unmute your mics and talk amongst yourselves or talk to me about stuff. You know, it doesn't have to just wait for me to do stuff, but I think I'm going to go ahead and build a gating system for this thing. So sometimes I'll just take some of the gating wax I've got just to see how big it is and how effective it might be at filling some of these things. For the log, I'd like to make sure that I'm actually attaching a gate to the end of the log right here to make sure that it fills completely. For the rocks and stuff, I'm going to take a diameter that's the next size up. If this is 1/4 inch, this is 3/8, and I might do like 1, 2, or 3 attachments of the 3/8 along this edge of the rocks, and then a small piece of the 1/4 inch too. So as I'm thinking and kind of envisioning all of this, I'm going to make some cuts and cut this up into little pieces and see how I'm going to do this. Okay, so one of these and maybe one of these. Maybe that's all I need for this. Of those 2 pieces, if I put one on like this, and I put one on about here, and then the third one is going to come off of the log right here, that's probably plenty, and that would be good. Okay, so I'll just kind of set that up and hook that up and see if I can make that work. Okay. Sometimes I have to talk to myself too. You know, you have to talk your way through all of this stuff. So I want to shorten these up if I can, because there's no reason to have them any longer than they need to be. And as you're pouring metal into the mold, you know, the bronze doesn't really like to flow. I mean, we're asking it to do a lot. And so if I can run it through a shorter pipe, it stays hotter longer and it flows better. It has better flowability into the mold. And so I'm going to try to shorten up all of these sprues, these alleged pipes here, to something around 1.5 inches or so long, something like that. And then I'm going to turn on my gas and light me up a torch and get this party started right here. So with the torch on, I'm going to weld my first piece to the rock over here on the side. So 5 to 8 seconds in the flame and get myself attached, which is really nice. And another one like that. I got to find the angle to hold this at with my fingers. Okay, then heat up the knife and then bring it in here and do the weld and then let go of it after it has had a chance to freeze off a little bit. And one more time right here on the end of the log, and I'm only getting on one edge of the end of the log because the log has detail on it, because somebody had to go and actually put wood grain in the end of the damn log. So this is
I
going
was
to go
just
right.
so happy with the detail that I could get out of the wax versus clay. I like went for it.
I
I
shouldn't.
love detail. I like detail, and I like working in small pieces like this. It's fun.
Okay, I shouldn't complain. I'm going to let this set up and cool for just a minute. This has 3 sprues on it, and my box full of styrofoam cups with the wax on them is out in the other room. So I'm going to go run and get that. I'll be right back. So this noon, we talked about whether I should break that log off of there and cast it separate, or whether I should cast it all together with the rocks. And I just really decided that it was going to be way too difficult for me to be able to weld this tiny little weld here onto this tiny little log with my welder, because I would pretty much obliterate things. So the easiest thing for me to do is to cast it in place and be able to feed it separately with its own sprue, which I think is going to happen really nicely. And so I'm going to change camera angles so you guys can see what the next thing I'm going to do here is. And I'm going to do this. And so I'm going to weld this onto that just like that. And so I'm going to need some flame on. And I'm going to use the bigger knife now because I'm going to be welding a little bit larger, more complex, set of 3, count them 3 things to this. And so I saw that my meniscus of wax was just not quite right on my cup, that it was peeling off a little bit, that it needed to be welded on just a little bit better. So I touched that with the large flat knife first, and now I'm going to go ahead and weld this thing on here. So 3 of them go right on there and go like that, and then I pull the knife out, and it is at fusion temperature, and now it is coming down to frozen solid temperature, and I can turn this off because I don't need to run that anymore. So it's kind of hard to envision unless you can actually see it in practice right here. But this is going to be how it casts, the orientation in space for it when the metal goes in. So the metal goes in the cup and fills up the cup. The metal goes down through the sprues and fills up the pattern cavity in the mold. And that's how we're going to get that piece cast. So I really have to take all of my cues for designing the gating system from what are the thickest pieces in the sculpture, how the metal is going to flow throughout all of the pieces and parts in the sculpture, and what I really need to attach sprues to make sure that those things cast successfully. And we've been able to do that with this piece right here. And I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to put that, I stand these things up on their cup when they're done, because that's how we store them. And then when we put them through the dipping process, that's how they dry on the shelf in between coats, in between dips. So I'm going to stand this up over with all the other pieces that are off camera here. And I'm probably going to switch into a sculpting mode here, because I think I'm pretty much done with well, with everything else, except I might still use this thing here. So I'm going to be sculpting this little sculpture that I started weeks ago. Today, over the noon hour, I just threw some hair style on there. Actually, hair form. It's not quite styled yet. So I thought I would play with actually trying to style the hair. And so I'm going to need a little bit of scrap wax to be able to continue to work on the volumes and the styling of the hair, the individual tresses of hair in this particular piece. So I'm going to take this scrap wax and stick it under my armpit, because I don't need to turn on my hot box. I'm only using just a tiny little bit of wax. And so with this thing, I have been using individual pieces of warm wax and kind of making them, rolling them out and making them into coils, and then applying the individual coils onto the head and not blending them, so that I get individual tresses of hair that kind of flow in a kind of a cascading pattern. Real similar to the way that the hair was on the model, real similar to the way that all of you guys' hair works. You know, I haven't even really started to sculpt the face on this thing yet. I was kind of holding off on that until I got all the rest of this thing kind of put together, and then I'm probably going to sculpt the face too. But let's fire up the torch, and I'm going to use a hot knife to just kind of get these hair tresses. Oh, you can't see that very good on this camera angle. So I'm going to get these hair tresses kind of welded together, especially in the cracks and crevices between them. And shift over here so I get a little closer to the camera. And then maybe some of the ways that I'm welding the wax together also lends itself to hair form. Maybe I am thinning out these tresses of hair, and maybe I can run my knife in a kind of an S curve and not just in a straight line, to get this hair to flow better and to kind of act more like hair. Hair kind of acts like a liquid because it moves and it flows as a person moves. And we want to get that kind of sense of movement happening, even in a still sculpture, even into a frozen sculpture. We're always trying to get a sense of implied movement going, especially with a human figure or maybe with an animal. And so we're trying to get movement to happen in any soft surface, like hair, fur, the tail. If you've got a tail that is trailing behind a moving figure, whether it's a sea otter or a fox or a wolf or something like that, we're really trying to get that sense of implied movement to happen. I mean, even if the animal is laying down and at rest, like a cat or something like that, there's still a sense of implied movement in that tail. And so if there's any way that we can get it to be fluffy and not straight, but curving and flowing, curves tend to suggest the idea of flowing movement, like water or hair or fur, and that suggests sensuality in the piece. And so we're trying to impart that idea of sensuality into the piece when we're sculpting the hair. And I don't do a lot of work with a hot knife because I'm mostly trying to model the piece with warm wax and my fingertips or the tool. The tool, where did I put the tool? You know, I keep coming back to the idea of the Italian sculpting tool. Not just Italian, but the number 181 Italian sculpting tool, which is my absolutely favorite of all time sculpting tool, because there is a curve on the end of that tool, as well as one edge is serrated and one edge is straight. You guys all have this, so you already know. But this is such a cool and diverse tool because I can use the tip of that and I can push with it, and I can use it to fill in gaps and holes if I have, you know, someplace where I need to press in and push in some extra material. I can do all the sculpting of my facial features with the tiny tip of this tool, because I can go in and actually, you know, I can excavate out eyes and you know, eye details and work with, you know, the eyelids and everything on a teeny tiny basis, and the nose and the nostrils and everything, things that are way too small for my hands and fingertips to get into, and things that quite frankly are no fun to sculpt for me with a needle tool, with a ceramics needle tool or something. I mean, I would much rather manipulate the wax with this number 181 tool. It just seems to be a tool that will do almost everything for me when I'm trying to sculpt the figure, especially on a super small scale. I have to tell you that I really haven't actually sculpted this figure based on this pattern before. And this is freaking hard, let me tell you, to try to get to part the lips. I'm sorry, did I say a bad word?
No, I'm sorry, I interrupted. I wanted to ask a question, but I interrupted. I was bad.
No, good, go for it. I'm just sitting here sculpting and babbling. You ask away.
I was wondering where you finally found those when you were looking for them.
Well, okay, so I've been buying these things for 35 years, ever since I was in graduate school. And back in the day, it was mail order to Sculpture House in New York City, and it was a go-to place and everybody went there all the time. Then over the years, they took this vast array of tools that they were carrying and slowly whittled them down to a very small number that they still make, and this didn't apparently make the cut. And so I was, you know, Googling this concept of the forged steel sculpting tool for wax, using those as my search terms. And I found several other sculpture tool companies that had something similar. And there's, you know, stainless steel ones now that are being made, but they're kind of being just stomped out, you know, punched out in China, and they're not very good. They don't have the soul that these things have.
Chinese steel never does. You'll never find a Chinese shackle on a crane. Those guys find shackles from China in their toolbox. They throw them away.
Oh dear. Well, you know, the tools are made cheap and they're made fast. And I used to really not like Chinese stuff, and then some of the quality has come up quite a bit in the last, you know, 10 years or so. So I've been buying Grizzly power tools, like the table saws and band saws and stuff that Grizzly makes and imports into the West Coast from the Pacific Rim. And some of those things are okay for the money. They're a lot better than they were 15, 20 years ago.
Well, they're good with engines and electronics, but steel is just one of those things that I don't think it's ever been their strong point. There's a lot of things that they do really well, that they do better than anybody else, but not steel.
Well, and it's too bad. America, you know, had this really wonderful, magical combination of resources in the Rust Belt in the upper Midwest. Minnesota had iron mining on the Iron Range, and they still, can create this taconite, which is an iron, kind of a processed iron thing that they then ship across the Great Lakes to Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh had the steel mills, where they made the steel. And then they were able to ship that around the Great Lakes to places like Detroit to make the cars and everything else. They'd also ship it out to the East Coast, to the shipyards, to the boat builders, on the East Coast to make Navy ships and stuff like that. So, I mean, we had a really good thing going on until the de-industrialization, of America during the 1980s and 90s, when we overseas a lot of these industries to third world countries because the labor was so much cheaper, and you could work people 6 days a week, 10-hour days, and pay them next to nothing. And it was really, really sad. It was sad for American workers. It was sad for American industry. And we've also seen that, okay, so we can get cheap goods shipped back to us from overseas, but they might not have the same quality. And we're finding that our own national security interests become undermined when we don't have these industries that are healthy in this country. We still have manufacturing in the United States, but we don't have it to the degree that we had it. And I think that the Biden administration is interested in trying to promote that as much as possible. The Trump administration thought that they wanted to promote that through tariffs that they placed on certain things like aluminum and steel and other manufactured goods, but they didn't really work very hard in actually developing domestic industry and trying to keep it here. The Carrier refrigeration air conditioning plant in Indiana, was going to shut down, and Trump campaigned there in 2016 to keep it open. And then he won election, and one thing led to another, and it still shut down in 2017 and 2018. So, sometimes the market forces are such that things just go bye-bye, and sometimes we don't work very hard to try to maintain our industries, which is too bad. In a place like Coos Bay, where we are starved for new industry to replace fishing and timber, or also looking for redeveloping fishing and timber in sustainable ways, we could really use some kind of industry here on the coast, but getting our goods to market to the I-5 corridor makes it just that much more expensive than people who actually locate on the I-5 corridor, do their manufacturing, slap it on a truck, and can send it right up the interstate. We're 55 miles off the interstate, and getting our stuff to market is so much harder than it is for folks who are right on the interstate. I'm sorry, that was a really rambling look at American manufacturing and economy and transportation, but those are some of the reasons why we still languish in kind of a 35-year-long depression, economic depression here on the coast. We've got a good workforce, but to try to attract industry and business here, to be able to pay good wages and have a skilled workforce that can create a finished product is a very difficult sell. Even though we have a natural port here in a port city. Okay, I'll shut up.
I think a lot of the problem is that we want cheaper stuff, and we still, I don't know that we get it cheaper overseas than we do at home, because by the time they send it here and mark it up, we're not really saving a lot of money. We're outsourcing and we're paying for it because we're having to work more to pay for these things. We're buying from everybody else, and we're cutting our own jobs.
Yeah, well,
we like shipping logs out of Coos Bay for since the turn of the 20th century.
Yeah.
I was reading that somewhere the other day. I didn't know that they'd been shut. I thought that just started in the 80s and 90s, but no, they've been doing it for over 100 years.
Well, there's a market for it. And so, but, as far as what it does to the local economy, if you don't make a value added product here, if you don't mill the thing into lumber and sell it as lumber or make it into uh, plywood or some other, value added product, you're really, cutting your own throat just exporting the raw logs. And it's too bad, but there is a market for the raw log export. And so they just do it because they can, because, we don't tell people that they can't do it. That's, the free
Yeah,
market.
well, in the 80s, from what I understood, a lot of those mills shut down because they were on the English system and the lumber demand was for metric.
Yeah.
And it cost so much for the mills to redo that, many of them couldn't.
Well, and that made sense. I mean, but those mills
So
were
why didn't
also,
they, instead of selling out and sending our logs somewhere else, why didn't they provide low interest loans or grants to those companies so that they could switch over? They did it at Gilcrest Mill, and they're still up and running. They're doing good.
yeah.
Hindsight's 2020, right?
Yeah.
Well, it kind of depends on the mill owner. If it's an old family and there's changing generations, the original owner, died, and it's the grandkids that are taking over or something, and maybe they just want to get their money out of it and quit. If their heart's not in the business to keep the business going, it's really easy for those things to just fall to ruin. And if there's nobody else to come in behind and actually build the new mill that can mill things in either metric or English dimensions, depending on the market, that would have been a fix that would have taken some ingenuity, but it's possible to have done that. And we didn't do that.
Well, I think there was other things too, like the EPA. Didn't the EPA start becoming really active in the 70s and 80s, and they started tightening regulations as well? I don't
Yeah,
know. I don't remember when that occurred.
yeah, there was a lot of regulatory stuff that contributed, and we tend to blame it all on regulation, but um, a bad thing that happened with business in the United States, or commerce in the United States, is that we used to build businesses based on a profit margin of 10% or 20% or something like that. And now if you can't have a business that has a 30 or 40% profit margin, you're a chump and you shouldn't be in that business. And with that kind of thinking, that's why we've gone to hedge funds and every other damn con game that's out there.
It's like when they tell you they're raising the prices, not because they're losing money, but because they're not making their
They're not making enough.
they're not making their projected profits.
Yeah.
Not at 10 or 20% or losing money, but they're not making what they projected, so they're going to raise the price.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, that's business in the 21st century. And so one way to deal with that is to take it overseas, where you can build a factory or a plant or a mill and, hire a super cheap workforce that is desperate for a job and will work for nothing.
And screw the EPA, throw all your chemicals in the Yangtze.
Well, there's no EPA over there.
Yeah. I couldn't believe that. Isn't that like one of in the top 10 of the polluted rivers in the world?
Sure. Yeah.
I think it's the Yangtze. I can't remember. There's like one of them there in Indonesia that's really bad. I mean, the water is like colors it shouldn't be.
Yeah. Well, we can start to rethink, our industries, especially something like the timber industry, as renewable resource. And it's actually a solar powered industry. I mean, it's one of the greenest industries you got, because, you stick trees in the ground and they grow, and 30 or 40 years later, you harvest them, and it's renewable if it's managed properly. And so just trying to figure out how to manage the forest the best, not just to get the maximum amount of harvest out of them, but to keep them healthy, and now to keep them spaced good enough so that we don't have wildfires that wipe them out. Modern forest practices are now, giving way to, very contemporary and postmodern forest practices. And, hopefully, if we can, get through the anxiety about the spotted owl and other endangered species and try to figure out how to manage forests and forest lands, to help those species, but also to be able to make sure that we've can meet certain harvest goals to keep an industry running, that would be good. The other thing is if we could get into other kinds of manufactured lumber products, like the kinds of manufactured timbers that went into the health and science building. That's new technology. It's kind of based on oriented strand board, but it's trying to make large timbers so that you can build, multi-story buildings out of wood instead of out of steel product. It's a brand new idea for the timber industry, and you don't have to use large logs to do it. It's taking, logs and wood fiber and gluing it together under extreme pressure to make these very large timbers that can be used as building materials. It's an exciting new thing as far as the timber industry goes.
I think it's pretty cool because it should be more earthquake resistant as well.
Yeah. What was that? Did Zach?
They also got like 3D printers for houses now. I can get a house built in like 2 days.
Yeah, I've seen the 3D printers printing them out in concrete. That's an interesting concept for sure. But getting back to the idea of earthquake resistance, yeah, it would be nice to be able to build with wood, a really, really strong manufactured kind of wood with perhaps steel bracket joints to kind of hold it together, kind of like we did in the OCCI building. That's got some of that as kind of decorative timber framing on the inside of the building, but that's also meets earthquake codes now, which is really good.
I seen that where they did that on some of the older brick buildings in Portland, and they do it a lot in San Francisco too, with the cross pieces, and I think they've got turnbuckles and coil rod in there too.
Yep. Yeah, all of that's really important for seismic retrofitting. I'm looking at trying to seismic retrofit my own house foundation. I've got a house built in 1950. It was built on concrete block walls on a poured concrete footing. And so I'm trying to figure out how to reinforce this this foundation system that would just shake apart in an earthquake. And I think I might have to actually trench alongside the building and form up and pour a second foundation that bolts into and kind of locks into the original foundation to kind of help buttress and hold it up.
That's exactly what you'll have to do. You'll have to jack up your house about a ½ inch and freaking re-pour a second foundation, marry it to the old foundation, and then set the house back down on the new foundation.
Yeah.
That sounds like it. That sounds like a job for Ramjack.
I've done something very similar to that before. It's not fun, but jacking up a house is always a cool story. So.
Oh yeah, I had a 100-year-old house. We had to replace a beam that was about 10 feet long underneath an outer wall, and that was some crazy shit trying to get that done.
Yeah. Well, and it gets expensive, so it's something I have to budget for, and I'm probably going to do it when I retire, when I've got time to mess with it. We do live in the Cascadia subduction zone. If you guys take geology from Professor Metzger, you'll hear lots about the earthquake risk that we have. It doesn't earthquake often here, but of course, every 300 years or so, we get a magnitude 9 earthquake that creates a tsunami and earthquake situation for us. And it's been, what, 321 years since the last magnitude 9 quake that we've had. And they've happened like clockwork over the last 10,000 years or so, about on average every 240 to 300 years. And so, geologically, we're kind of due for one. although there have been spans of up to 500 years or more where they haven't happened. But the more that fault gets locked up, the more energy it releases when it does go. So when the earthquakes come, every 200 or 240 years or so, it's a magnitude 8 earthquake. And when the fault is locked up for 500 years, we definitely get magnitude 9 and above earthquakes. Which
Yeah, because the less often things happen in frequency, the more drastic they are when they do.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's been moving, everything's been moving a lot lately. I wonder how global warming affects that as well.
Well, I can't speak to global warming, but I can tell you that
Or climate change, excuse
well,
me, I was not being politically correct.
no, it's okay. Sea levels are rising around the world, except in Coos Bay and along the West Coast. And what's happening is that we're getting uplift. We always get uplift from this Cascadia subduction zone fault. As the Pacific plate pushes on the American plate, it subducts underneath of it. And so we've been going up while everybody else is experiencing sea level rise. Our tidal gauges are actually showing that our land is rising. So when we get our earthquake, not only are we going to have an earthquake and a tsunami, but we're also going to have subsidence. We usually have about 6 feet of subsidence after one of these major earthquakes. That's why you've got a lot of those ghost forests that get kind of unburied along the coastline. Those forests grew when the land was pushed up higher so that that land was above sea level and forests could grow there. And then when the earthquake happens, subsidence happens, and then that plunges that forest into the ocean, and then it becomes a ghost forest. But because it's not exposed to oxygen, it doesn't rot. And so those are 4,000-year-old trees that we see the roots of them every springtime, between the king tides and the action that happens from the storms and everything. They get unburied from the sand for a little bit. So that's kind of part of what we deal with right here. We're seeing our land rising faster than sea level is rising. It's hard to wrap your mind around it sometimes, the stuff that we've got going on here.
It was kind of crazy, Mount Etna going off. Speaking of art in Italy, did any of you see the eruptions on the news?
Today?
And no, just over the last month, it's been going off, Mount Etna in Italy.
No, I hadn't heard about that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I thought it was bizarre. Just I don't know how long it's been since it's gone off, but like the news with everything, I'm pretty sure that they're making more drama out of it than it really is. Probably like Mount St. Helens, it steams every once in a while, and we look at it, it's like, oh well.
Well, most of these volcanoes are active, unless they're an inactive volcano and have become a mountain. And so, yeah, Etna is an active volcano in an active system. Anyway, we've been at it here together today again for about an hour. And I'm talking about a lot of not art while I'm trying to sculpt in front of you guys and do this as a demonstration. But you guys have been pushing wax around for 6 weeks now. This is the 6th week of the quarter. And so next week, I'm going to mix up some ceramic shell slurry in the out in my shed behind Eden Hall. And so I'm going to need some patterns to come in here so I can gate up some patterns on Monday and Wednesday of next week and start pushing patterns through this process. So we have to try to bring this quarter, at least the creative part of it, to an end. And so if you guys can find an end on these sculptures and get them resolved, please bring them on in here, leave them on the table on the west side of the building, outside of my office here, and I can bring them in and get them gated up and process them.
I am literally getting ready to smooth out my bird and do a rough etching of feathers.
Woohoo!
and then I'm done.
Fantastic.
Every time I touch it, I see something I don't like about it, and I keep modifying it, and I'm done with it. So I'll bring it in on Tuesday. Do you need me to leave like a note or anything, or?
No, I'll be able to figure out whose is whose. I do want you to photograph it in the wax before you get rid of it so that you can upload that photograph to coursework so that I've got, I've got the evidence of your work just in case
Yeah.
something were to happen to the piece.
I have uploaded 3 already.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
You're
I
so
haven't
good.
done that yet. I'm glad you reminded me. I forgot.
Okay. Well, please be taking photos of this because you're probably just really proud of this sculpting that you're doing. You can't believe that you're actually a sculptor. So this is cool. And maybe you guys are sharing this on Facebook or Instagram or something. You're showing all your friends, hey, you guys look at me. I'm a sculptor. I'm a bronze caster, because quite literally you are. And that's really cool.
Hey, James, sorry,
Yeah.
when do we have to have the pictures uploaded by?
Well, I put no closing date on that. So that's good until the end of the quarter. It's
Oh, okay.
open-ended. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you.
So whenever you get around to it, but I'll just have to keep reminding folks to make sure that it happens because that'll be good. Okay, so I can make this quit now, so you guys can go eat dinner or help your kids with your homework or something. Thank you for being here today. I'm going to get to my talking head view so that I can say goodbye to you guys. Thanks for coming in and being here. We had a good class this evening, even though we didn't talk about sculpture very much. We got a lot of sculpture done.
Thank you, Fritz.
You're welcome. And I'll see you guys again next Monday night. So have a good weekend.
You too. Bye.
Bye.